All right, so the next unit we're going to get into is the cell and organelles, but we're going to start with what makes cells remain so small? Why not have one cell that makes up one human? There's a reason for this, and that's what we're going to go into now. But in terms of size, a small molecule can be in nanometers. A nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. And then an animal cell is about a micrometer, which is, 10 micrometer. A micrometer itself is about 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And a plant cell is a little bigger, about 100 micrometers. So, but why do they have to be so tiny? Well, what limits cell size is something called the surface to volume ratio. You know surface area, and you know how to find that, and you know how to find volume. The surface area in this case, right here, if the sides, it's height times width times the number of sides. And so what happens is there has to be a limit, a number that satisfies the cell in terms of diffusion, right? Things have to move across. And if it's huge, that's not going to work very well. And also, it puts a high demand on DNA. So a really large cell would require that the DNA does a lot more work, make a lot more proteins that it can't handle. So as the cell gets bigger, the volume increases, and the volume ends up increasing faster than the surface area. So if you look at this, if this the total surface area is 6, right? Total volume is 1. It's a 6:1 ratio, right? But here we have a 1:1 ratio. And here again, it's a 6:1 ratio. And this is something that you're going to work on next when you're working with the packet. So metabolic requirements set upper limit. As the cell gets larger, moving materials in and out cell fast enough to support life is difficult. So this is one of the reasons, and this is really the main reason for cells to remain small. So in order to solve this problem of getting things in and out and having enough material in order for metabolism to work, then the challenge is solved by being multicellular. So the cell divides anytime it gets a little larger than it should be. So we're going to talk about different types of cells, but before we do that, something that all cells have regardless, you have plasma membrane, right? We've talked about that already. Cytoplasm, chromosomes in the form of DNA, and then ribosomes. Ribosomes are made are the ones that help make protein, and remember, protein is very, very important. So viruses are not really considered cells because they do not have the requirement to survive on their own. So there are two main kinds of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. And here you see 3 kinds, right? Prokaryotic is bacteria. We think that this is the cell that came up, that evolved first because it doesn't have any organelles, but it has ribosomes, it has a plasma membrane, and it has genetic material. Eukaryotic cells come in 2 forms, both the plant and the animal cell. The plant cell has some different features than the animal cell, but both of them have plasma membrane, both of them have organelles, and both of them have to have their cell size a certain size in order to satisfy the surface area to volume ratio so that things can go in and out easy. Waste can be disposed of easily, along with it can carry out its functions properly, and the DNA can do what it needs to do, which is make protein for it. So prokaryotic cells, before the karyon, so before nucleus, that's what that is. They don't have a nuclei, they don't have any organelles, and they do have ribosomes, but they also have a cell wall, and they have DNA. And DNA is not in the nucleus, though. It's in what we call the nucleoid region. In the case of eukaryotic cells, these are a lot more complex because now there are organelles involved, and both plant and animal cells are eukaryotic. Cell walls can be found in the case of fungi and plants only. And then there are a lot of organelles. The organelles are the ones that carry out different functions within the cell. There are different shapes. We mentioned this term flagella last unit, but we didn't define it, so we're going to define it now. Since the bacteria is single-celled and it wants to move, it's going to use flagella for motion, but we'll talk about all the organelles after we finish up about cell size and the limitation to cell size. So let's go and talk about why the cell size is limited. We know now there are different kinds of them, and we're going to talk about all the organelles and what they do and where they're found, and then the differences between plants and animals. Okay, so in terms of cell size to volume, the surface area to volume ratio, what I was talking about earlier, and I want to look at this one more time. When the cell size increases, the volume increases a lot faster than surface area. And that's why it becomes a problem in terms of size. So if the size doubled, the cell would require 8 times more nutrients and would have 8 times more waste to excrete. So then that becomes a big problem for the cell. It can't do it. And it becomes a problem for the DNA because it has to now do overtime work, which it might not be able to and have the cell survive. And so for that reason, the smaller the cell size, the greater it's going to work, and it's going to have greater surface area when it's small. And for example, the small intestine has little villi called microvilli, and it gives a lot of surface area, and that increases absorption. So here it is, surface area refers to outside of the object, right? The area, volume is inside. So if you have a 2 centimeter cube, the ratio would be 3:1, but if you have an 8 centimeter cube, then you're going to have a volume that's going to be too large to sustain that. So cells may increase their surface area to volume ratio by having long, thin shapes. That's like the little microvilli I was telling you about with the small intestine. Folding plant cells have a really large vacuole which pushes organelles to the edge where they can get regular access to water. Okay, so you'll now work on the cell size packet, and that will be due with the next class size, next class time. By that point, I will be back. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon.